Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Joanne Smedley, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Colonel Gavin Keating. We warmly welcome members of the Royal Military College Duntroon 1967 graduating class who are here to commemorate the service of Lieutenant Errol John Lee and Lieutenant Bernard Anthony Garland, whose stories will be told shortly. We also welcome the families of these two men. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors. Please stand and join in the singing of the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the stories behind two of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Errol John Lee. Errol John Lee was born on the 30th of July 1946 to Ashley and Mary Lee in the Sydney suburb of Ashfield. Known as John, he grew up on the north coast of New South Wales and matriculated from Corindi High School in 1963. His reference letters from the school and St Albans Church describe a well-liked young man with leadership potential who was involved in his local community. Lee enrolled at the Royal Military College, Duntroon, in January 1964. He was a hard-working staff cadet and was active in the sporting life of the college. He won a half colour for rugby, playing the first 15 during his final 2 years. He was also on the rugby committee and played cricket for the second 11. After graduating in December 1967, Lee was commissioned as a lieutenant in the 5th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. In January 1968, he became a platoon commander. He spent 1968 training at Holsworthy Barracks in Sydney. During this time, he and the other men of 5RAR prepared themselves for the battalion's second tour of Vietnam. Lee undertook courses in psychological operations, army health and Southeast Asian conditions, and civil affairs. In December 1968, Lee married Barbara Kirk of Dixon, and shortly afterwards, 5RAR left for Vietnam. 5RAR was based in Nui Dat in the Phuoc Tuy province. The battalion's overall objective was the pacification of the province, which involved finding and destroying enemy bases, preventing contact between the enemy and civilian population, and seeking to build a secure civil and political situation in South Vietnam. 12 kilometres west of the Nui Dat base, the Nui T Vây and Nui Dinh mountains rise abruptly out of the plains. Known to the Australians as the Warburtons, these mountains house extensive interlocking defensive complexes held by local Viet Cong units. Throughout May 1969, 5RAR carried out a reconnaissance in force in these mountains. Lee commanded the 1st Platoon A Company. On the 11th of May 1969, his platoon was patrolling on the northern slopes of the Nui T Vây mountains. Around midday, the platoon came under heavy fire from concealed caves and bunkers. Lee moved forward of his platoon in order to reconnoitre the enemy's position, but he and 2 other soldiers were shot and wounded. Enemy fire pinned down his platoon and the firefight continued for several hours. Towards nightfall, Sergeant William Ward of the Assault Pioneer Platoon used a flamethrower to suppress the enemy, an action for which he was awarded the Military Medal. His work allowed one platoon to be relieved and the wounded soldiers evacuated. Lee had been badly wounded and died shortly afterwards. He was 22 years old. Survived by his parents and wife, his brother Brian and sister Rosemary, John Lee's remains were returned to Australia and buried at Woden Cemetery in Canberra. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on your right, along with more than 500 others from the Vietnam War. His photograph is displayed today beside the eastern side of the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Errol John Lee, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world. Today we also remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Bernard Anthony Garland. Bernard Anthony Garland was born in Sydney on the 26th of September 1946 to Bernard James and Lillian Joyce Garland. After receiving his leaving certificate from Epping Boys High School in 1963, Garland began officer training at the Royal Military College, Duntroon. To his classmates, he was known as Bernie, but others also knew him as Tony. Garland's superior officers noted that he was a keen and well-disciplined staff cadet who was active in extracurricular activities. He played rugby and squash and was a member of the organising committees of the ski and sailing clubs. In December 1967, Garland was commissioned with the rank of lieutenant and was posted to 1st Field Regiment, Royal Australian Artillery. With this unit, he undertook several courses of further training as an artillery officer. After marrying Elizabeth Ann Scott, he joined his unit at Brisbane in early May 1969 and left for Saigon. Once reaching Saigon, the unit moved to the Australian base at Nui Dat in Phuoc Tuy Province. At the end of 2 weeks in-country training, his battery was deployed to Fire Support Base Virginia. From this time, the battery alternated between 4 weeks on operational duties, providing artillery support to the 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, and 2 weeks at the Nui Dat base. At the end of 1969, Garland worked as a gun position officer within the battery, which involved commanding gunners and maintaining and laying the weapons. In late February 1970, Garland was transferred to Alpha Company Headquarters 6 RAR NZ as a forward observer. In this new role, he was attached to patrolling infantry and would call in artillery fire support. As well as the ever-present threat of enemy mines and booby traps, Garland now faced a high risk of direct contact with the enemy. In March 1970, 6 RAR NZ began its last operation in Vietnam, codenamed Operation Townsville. The aim of this operation was to put pressure on local enemy units, especially the Viet Cong D445 Battalion. Garland's unit operated in the remote Nui Mai Tal Mountains in the northeast of the Phuoc Tuy Province. Towards the end of the operation, on the 22nd of April 1970, Garland and A Company Headquarters were patrolling south of Suen Mok. Soon after 10 a.m, Garland stood on an M16 anti-personnel mine and was killed. He was 23 years old. Garland was a popular officer, and with his death occurring only 1 day before the operation concluded and the unit returned to Nui Dat, the company was affected particularly badly. 4 other Australians were wounded in the explosion, including Company Sergeant Major James Miles, who helped prod out a safe path for the medics with his bayonet. Garland's remains were returned to Australia, and today he is commemorated at Norwood Park in Canberra. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on your right, along with more than 500 others from the Vietnam War. His photograph is displayed today beside the western side of the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Bernard Anthony Garland, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub of Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and good evening.